in the last couple of years of World War II, while bombs were raining down in Europe. One of the greatest technological revolutions in aviation history happened. The Luftwaffe, Nazi Germany's Air Force, was secretly establishing a whole new generation of aircraft jet fighters that could outrun, outgun, and outmaneuver their enemies with terrifying precision. The Messerschmitt Me 262, a fast and deadly jet fighter, became the winner of Germany's jet program. In this documentary, Germany's ambitious fighter jet project will be discussed, showing how delays, mistakes, and infighting ruined what could have changed the war. This story highlights not only the lost potential of Nazi Germany's aviation program, but also how these jets shaped the future of aircraft warfare. After the Treaty of Versailles, Germany was forced to weaken its military, but its air power remained an important weapon in past conflicts. Between 1933 and 1935, as Hitler came to power, Germany began transforming its military. Hermann Göring established the Luftwaffe in 1935 under Hitler's leadership. The Luftwaffe served as a powerful strategy which not only benefited the Air Force alone, but also supported Germany's military independence and expansion. With a booming aircraft industry, Germany rapidly produced thousands of planes, including designs from Messerschmitts, Dornier, Heinkel, and Junkers. By 1939, the production had reached 8,000 aircraft, signaling the importance of Air Force might to the Nazis. However, the Luftwaffe strategy was imperfect. Unlike their allies who focused on long-term bombing operations, Germany's policy prioritized quick, critical wars, which would turn out to be a huge mistake as the war dragged on. In the early 1930s, from World War I to World War II, aircraft technology played an important role. Major improvements were seen, and new aircraft speed records were made. Most nations worked on perfecting their piston engines, while military leaders focused on speed. However, pioneers like Frank Whittle in Britain and Hans Joachim Pabst von Ohan in Germany were pushing forward with their jet engine designs. Von Ohan's work caught the attention of aircraft manufacturer Ernst Heinkel, leading to the development of the Heinkel HE-178, the world's first jet-powered aircraft, which flew in August of 1939. In early 1940, Germany's air forces became increasingly interested in producing a jet-powered aircraft, and found out that Heinkel's proposal of launching his Heinkel HE-178 was rejected. It was 1941 when he designed the Heinkel HE-280, where two new innovations were made. The first, the ejection seat design, and a sophisticated tricycle landing gear. While speed and maneuverability were promised, Luftwaffe support for mass production was non-existent. At the same time, the Me-262 experienced some problems with the BMW 003 jet engine, which was initially unreliable. The engine soon resulted in flight tests in 1942 for the speedy and heavily armed fighter. In 1941, Heinkel's HE-280 outmaneuvered the Focke-Wulf 190 in a demonstration, winning some support for the jet fighters. Despite the lack of resources and competing internal influences, such rivalries hampered jet progress in Germany. By 1941, Hitler had focused on the east. Operation Barbarossa saw the German invasion into Russia, sending over 3 million troops and thousands of planes into Russian territory. In fact, the first couple of months saw the Luftwaffe in air superiority. However, in no time, its shortcomings became striking. First, it lacked a large-scale maintenance and repair plan. In the Blitzkrieg operation, doomed planes were flown back to Germany for repairs, which was successful in quicker, smaller operations. But the massive expansion of the Soviet Union proved a nightmare for logistics. By the end of 1941, fewer than 30% of Luftwaffe airfields in the east were still operational. At the same time, the Soviets managed to ferry their entire war industry that was west of the Ural Mountains out of the reach of the German bombers. A severe defect in Luftwaffe capacity was exposed: the lack of long-range strategic bombers to crash Soviet industry. The specter of Walther Weaver's vision and strategy haunted Luftwaffe, with the rising necessity for heavy bombers. From the very onset of the war, it started becoming more and more apparent that the Luftwaffe was deficient from a strategic point of view. After winning the battle in Western Europe in 1940, the Luftwaffe aimed at Great Britain, and that was to become known as the Battle of Britain. Hitler's dream for invading the island depended heavily on air superiority being gained by the Luftwaffe. This was to turn out to be much more complicated than past campaigns in Poland and France. By September 1940, it was still a very potent air force. But it had neither developed long-range bombers, which could have been critical for sustained attacks against Britain's industrial centers. The air superiority, which had been planned in the Battle of Britain, did not come through for the Luftwaffe, who instead of invading Britain, found itself in a long-standing aerial stalemate. In this light, one could see that Germany was not able to employ a strategic bomber to attack the factories, supply lines, and logistical infrastructure of Britain. While Germany had excellent tactical fighters, such as the Messerschmitt's Bf-109, it lacked the heavy bombers to strangle the other side's war production capacity on an alarming scale. The very emphasis on short-term tactical victories instead of long-term strategic objectives had put Germany in a situation where it was completely incapable of sustaining itself through prolonged warfare efforts. Interference with the Luftwaffe's performance from the coordination difficulties with the Kriegsmarine were also a serious drawback. Goering's privileged grip on Luftwaffe resources caused tension with the Navy, which had been requesting long-range reconnaissance aircraft and anti-shipping bombers to augment the U-boat campaign in the Atlantic. The Luftwaffe produced the Focke-Wulf 200 Condor, a maritime bomber capable of and dedicated to the sinking of merchant vessels. Though by failing to develop a strategic operational plan, that effort was severely compromised. The Condor operated from 1940 to 1941, and its tally of 85 sunk Allied merchant ships and damage amounted to 300,000 tons of Allied shipping. However, had actual coordination of operations by the Luftwaffe with those of the Kriegsmarine been performed, the damage inflicted on British supply lines could have been even greater. Though initially it was believed that German success on the battlefield was brought about by tactical air superiority, soon enough, the conflict would proceed to show the price of short-term focus. In the years to follow, particularly as the United States became a part of the war in 1941, German industrial capacity was stretched thinly. The U.S. rapidly grew its own wartime production capacity, putting out weapons and planes in an astonishingly short time. In 1944, American factories produced over 96,000 planes per year, which outstripped its German counterparts by an astonishing multiple. Germany, by contrast, barely managed a strenuous organization. Struck by short supply of raw materials, it hardly provided effective competition to the formidable will of the Allies. By 1943, Luftwaffe aircraft production stagnated, producing a paltry 3,000 new planes every year. Even after Erhard Milch made a concerted effort to bolster production within the Luftwaffe, 25,000 planes a year was still maliciously low against the tide of Allied production now rolling out in full force. During this negative scenario, against the backdrop of the so-called Allies' indiscriminate bombings, some of the core German factories were destroyed, making the shortage of airplanes and spare parts even graver. The inability to streamline production with the availability of key resources effectively crippled Germany's ability to maintain an effective air force, leading ultimately to the downfall of its once dominant air power. The worst aspect was their failure in leadership, particularly in regard to aircraft production. Ernst Udet, a World War I flying ace, was appointed in 1936 to run Luftwaffe aircraft production. Yet his incompetence and technical issues led to extremely ill-advised decisions. His obsession with dive bombing resulted in the Heinkel 177, built as a big 4-engine bomber, yet forced into the role of dive bomber, causing structural failure. The hurried development of the Messerschmitt 210 resulted in widespread mechanical failures. These mistakes on just normal production line aircraft cost precious time and money for Germany, but left them with a roster of worthless aircraft. The Luftwaffe's failure to adapt to the changing nature of warfare, coupled with its poor resource management and misaligned leadership, ensured that Germany's Air Force, once a hallmark of military strength, stood little to no chance against the unrelenting industrial efforts of their enemies. As the war progressed, the Luftwaffe lost what had remained of that commonly understood aspect of its power. It became just another side world, completely impotent with regard to strategic action due to a series of wrong strategies, extremely poor leadership, and failure even to keep pace with the needs of modern warfare. As the war went on, it became clear that the Luftwaffe's failure of vision in strategic bombing, inter-service coordination, and industrial production handicapped it. Early victories notwithstanding, inefficiencies within, wrong leadership decisions, and indifference to the new dynamics of warfare contributed to its eventual weakening. The Luftwaffe's inability to cope with increasingly industrial war, combined with ruinous effects of Hitler's intervention, meant that it was unable to keep pace with the combined production power of the Allies. The historians are convinced that Luftwaffe's downfall is a representative of Nazi Germany's general strategic failure. That's all, folks. The legacy of the Luftwaffe's jet program lives on, not only in military history but also in the technology that would be part of future aviation for years to come. What could have been a turning point in the war instead proved an example of how technological brilliance, when stopped in its tracks by bad decision-making, falls victim to history. However, the lessons learned from these jets will help military aviation, leaving a lasting impact on jet programs worldwide.